This is Demel Gonzalez of Heartwood Financial Services. Hey, thanks for joining us for our latest market update and outlook for the month of February. If this is your first time here, welcome. Thanks for joining us. You can hit subscribe if you enjoy this content. I would encourage you to do that. Hit the little bell if you want to get when the latest video comes out. If you've been here before, welcome back. I guess things haven't been too bad, right? Thanks for coming back. Now, we're going to talk about the elephant in the room today. It's going to be Russia invading Ukraine. And we're going to dig into how that affects the economies, what the Fed is thinking and how they're going to be impacted by this, and ultimately how it impacts your portfolio. So if you're curious to learn more, stay tuned. Thanks a lot. Okay, let's get things kick-started with the asset class returns. So you can see here in the blue, that is the month to date for February, and the green is the last 12 months. So when you do a quick lay of the land, you can see blue not so good, green much better. Large cap, let's start with that, down about 3% for the month, but still very positive for the last 12 months. So domestic stocks, again, taking a little bit of a hit. They actually were up almost halfway through the month, but things turned around with the news coming out of Russia, of course. We'll talk more about that. Ironically, though, small cap stocks are actually positive for the month of February. They actually had a pretty good month. They were up actually pretty big, and they dropped a little bit at the end, but still positive. And real estate was one of the ones that took the biggest hit. Interest rates going up, real estate is not happy, so you could see some of the negative effects there, but still pretty good 12-month period. And ironically, developed international stocks actually beat the large cap domestic stocks here in the U.S. And now some of that might be reversing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the outlook. But it was only down 1.34 for the month and positive for the last 12 months, but not by very much. Emerging markets, just not a good story, down 3.4%, negative for the last 12 months. A lot of what's going on there is China, and they're kind of struggling a little bit. And the U.S. fixed income, which are the more high-quality bonds, those were down for the month of February. And when interest rates go up, it's the negative correlation. Bonds will go down. And so unfortunately that hurt the bond market. And high yield, although high yield you can see only down 1.59, relatively did a little bit better. That's actually a sign that the economy is still pretty strong. It's just interest rates are going higher. And then the last one is the one that takes the cake. Commodities was up 7.09. I am happy to report that we have commodities in your portfolio, so we are taking advantage of that. And it's done really great for the last 12 months as well. The big story there is commodities have all these metals, but also has oil, natural gas. And so with everything going on, not only the economies of the world coming back, but then on top of that, you throw in the issue with Russia invading Ukraine, and that just makes oil spike even more. So if you want to learn a little bit more about what's going on with Russia and the implications and the outlook, stay tuned. That's coming up next. Okay, so you all know the big news, right? Russia invaded Ukraine. Instead of giving you news updates about what's going on there, I'm sure you've heard it and probably getting a little tired of it even. Plus, it changes constantly. By the time you get this, it's already going to be kind of old news. So instead of getting into the geopolitics and the history of all this, I want to get more into the actual implications to the stock market, to the economy, to you personally. And so I want to highlight essentially three things. Number one, you're seeing higher oil prices all the way around. And so there was already a lot of demand for oil as the economies of the world are getting out of Omicron, getting more into a normal type of economy. Then you have Russia invading Ukraine. Russia is a huge producer of oil, supplies a lot of oil, natural gas to Europe and the world. And so, of course, as you can imagine, all these sanctions and war might cause disruptions, and the sanctions are also potentially, although not yet, potentially influence the oil markets. And that is the fear. So just the fear of that potentially happening has made oil prices elevate even more. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the outlook. Of course, you also have food. Let me not forget, Ukraine, Russia, they make, or they produce, I should say, a lot of wheat and other grains. And so they're considered like the breadbasket of Europe in many ways. And so that's just going to just add on to the inflationary factors that we already have going on. So, of course, that's going to have some negative effects that I'll dive a little bit more in the outlook. And of course, you have the uncertainty of military escalation. Russia has nukes. There are nuclear power plants all around Ukraine. You probably saw that in the news recently too. And so a few false moves and things could escalate pretty badly. So I have a feeling that, this may not escalate into World War III here, but there's still a potential for more escalation that could disrupt the markets and cause more uncertainty. The good news, though, in all this is that Russia is a very small part of the global economy. As you can see by my little stat here, we're only at about 3% of GDP, I should say, not we, but Russia, 3% of GDP globally. So with Russia and Ukraine battling it out, it actually doesn't have that huge of an impact directly to GDP other than just making this inflation situation get even worse. All right, so for my favorite part, we get into the market outlook. I'm going to highlight two things. We're going to talk about inflation and the Fed. Those are big, big talking points right now. They're probably the number one influencers of what's going on in the market. And then I also want to give you a little historical perspective, history lesson, so to speak, on what happens with these big geopolitical events. And finally, the implications to the portfolios and some of the changes that we're making to address them. All right, so the most important piece of information for the outlook, I think, is inflation. And of course, this war with Russia and Ukraine is having a huge effect on oil prices. I probably don't need to tell you that the gas prices just keep going up. Here's a chart from Gas Buddy. You can see these are 3 different states, and you can see the trend. It's basically going up. Thankfully, here in Florida, it's still a little bit cheaper than some other places, so yay for us. But as you can see, that trend is not your friend at the moment. And the reason I bring this up is this is just creating a longer inflationary runway, so to speak. And my thesis was, we were getting over Omicron finally. Things were starting to get back to normal. We had all this demand, which was great. But things were going to start to level off as the supply kind of came back and things all around started getting back to normal. Unfortunately, this Russia-Ukraine situation has thrown a wrench in some of that, I believe. I think what's going to happen is this war is going to probably continue on because it looks like Putin is just really dead set on taking over the whole country, probably not going to have some sort of peaceful arrangement anytime soon. So as this continues, this is going to have negative effects on oil prices, food prices, like I talked about in that market update. And how does that affect the Fed? Well, the Fed is very concerned with inflation, and they've been talking about ways they want to cool it down. And now I'm afraid with this is that this might lengthen the amount of time it's going to take for the Fed and the economies globally to finally cool down from inflation. So it's basically making it harder on the Fed, which is going to make it a little harder on the economy potentially. Okay, so here is a little history lesson that I promised earlier in the video. So what I wanted to show you is on average, after a big geopolitical event, you can see here after 6 months from the event, the market is up 5%. And after a year, on average, it's up 9%. So the point here is, yes, geopolitical events initially have a negative impact. But historically, again, unless this is World War III, which I'm certainly not thinking that's where we are at the moment, it's probably just another event that's going to create some uncertainty. And as you could see historically, and here's a lot of different examples, this one kind of like maybe like the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, maybe a recent one was Brexit, the Brexit vote. And you can see how it had negative impacts. It was painful. Usually it's somewhere around 6 or 7%. We're actually down a little bit more than that already, down about 10, 11%. So this has been a little bit worse than some of these. And so you can also anticipate that we will also get a nice rebound as these things start to settle out. Okay, so there's definitely some light, hopefully, at the end of this ugly dark tunnel that we're in right now. All right, this is the nitty-gritty stuff, the implications. First of all, let me start off by saying that the global economy is strong, and the U.S. in particular is doing really, really well. In fact, we just had a jobs report today that was even better than expected. So the economy here is very, very strong. But I am growing more and more concerned by this monkey wrench that was thrown into this whole thing by Putin with Russia invading Ukraine. And I think the ones that are going to be the most affected is going to be Europe, unfortunately. They're the ones that are dependent on their oil and the food that comes in from that area. So their costs are going to go up. It's going to hurt their inflation numbers. And so as far as the implications, what we're going to start to do with the portfolios, and actually have begun already, is just lighten up a little bit in the European stocks and adding a little bit more to the domestic stocks, concentrating more on those dividend-paying stocks that are going to be a little bit more resilient to inflation, and also look at some of the stocks that are even using some hedges, or funds, I should say, that are using some hedges to protect a little bit against the downside. Now, again, I'm still pretty optimistic about things. This is just going to delay that inflation a little bit longer, which means that that recovery that I was hoping for at the back half of the year might get delayed a little bit further. It just all depends on how the situation with Ukraine goes. And so I just want to also add that I know this video is all about finances and your money, but I also want to remind you that this is also a humanitarian disaster over there in Ukraine, that Ukrainian people are really suffering. So I just ask you to remember them in your prayers. And hopefully, you know, we can also have Putin see the light of day that this is not going very well. Maybe he'll change his mind and have some peace to this. But probably not. We have to kind of prepare for the worst here. But thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And again, we'll hopefully see you soon.